never get too high and never get too low. The swings in a startup are insane. Like one day you'll go from, wow, we just got 500 users and Jason Oppenheim on our platform,
Mm.
um, to, wow, this platform sucks because of the way it's built. And you can't go too high or too low. I always say find the silver linings in everything and always try to learn and be better the next day than you came in the day before. I'll
Mm.
also say this is that the best thing that ever happened to me was getting that 2.8 in high school, because it shows that like that stuff doesn't mean much. What it does is it should like motivate you to find what you really like to do, and once you do that, you'll apply yourself, and you never know what the limits can be on that.
Mm. Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast. It's Kartik Ragaram, and that's as close as I'm getting to pronouncing the name right. But Kartik was, in his own words, wasn't the best student in high school. Graduated with a GPA of I think 2.83, if I remember. But good enough that he went to the University of Akron, but focused much more on playing basketball than doing great at school. And then took a step back after doing that for a period of time to see what he wanted to do with his life. Thought back to kind of what his high school and some of his college professors had given guidance on and mentorship on, and look to do a bit more in the business and business venture realm. So created a business called I think Yugo. It was, and he'll get into that. Create another business called Buggy, and then is on his current business, which is called Avocado. And so he'll dive into a little bit more of the details. Also working in a bit with Square and in the fintech space. So should be a good discussion. With that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Kartik.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Gave me a pretty great intro there, so I'm not sure how I can top that, but very very excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you on. So I gave the 30-second version of a much longer journey, but why don't we start with telling us or unpacking that a bit and tell us how your journey began, coming out of high school with a GPA that might not have been as stellar as you'd wanted, but was good enough to get you to go to or go into college. So tell us how your journey began.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, wow, looking all the way back to middle school and then high school. GPA was not great. So we started off, went to Hudson High School, just outside of Cleveland. So just for like geography purposes, it's like 30 minutes south of Cleveland, about 15 minutes north of Akron. As you stated, graduated with a 2.83 GPA. That number is always going to stick in my head just because when you're in school, GPAs are so synonymous with you as a person. And so was not the greatest student. But yeah, really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life back then. I think just like anyone else, really was just kind of go with the flow, wanted to have fun, um, hang out with people, that sort of thing. So was good enough to get me into Akron. A little backstory on that. So the dean at the time of the business school, his name was Ravi Crovey. I believe he's at like Weber State out in Utah now.
Hmm.
And um, I didn't initially get into the business school. So I got in just generally to the university. And because my grades weren't good enough to get in there, even though my ACT scores were. And so I remember going with my mom. We went and we talked to him, and I just made the case like, hey, I should be in this business school. Let let me in. I understand, the GPA isn't what you think, but I'm telling you, if you let me get in here, we can make some stuff happen. And I'm very fortunate that he accepted me and was able to, really start on that path at that point.
Now, and maybe just to back up or to expand a little bit, because I think one of the things that we talked a little bit before is, when you started in college, basketball was a lot more exciting than going and having to do homework and tests and classes. So, kind
Yeah.
of what was that kind of tipping point or transition where you said, okay, I'm probably not going to be a professional basketball player. There's probably not a career there, which for 99.9% of people, they're all the same boat. It's the
Yeah.
0.1% that ever make it. So what was kind of that tipping point? How did you figure out, okay, where do I go from here? What do I do? Because now I have to actually or think
Mhm.
about what I'm going to do when I grow up, type of a thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I did not even when I got into college, I didn't take it too seriously. I was very consumed with consumed with, D1 basketball and going through like the preferred walk on and going through all those different things, practicing every single day. I think people really underestimate how much goes into actually playing on, that kind of level. There's practices, there's games, there's workout conditionings, all this different stuff. And so I really wanted to, because I didn't know anyone at the school, I wanted to really make that a priority in my life.
Mm,
And, um, you know, I'll never forget, like, it was fun. It was a great time. I would skip classes to go, but my academic professor or academic advisor, and this is really what, changed my life, sent me a message saying that you're about to be on academic probation if you don't get your grades up. And so
mm.
I think at that time I was probably around like a 2.4 GPA, something pretty bad in your first semester. And so yeah, at that time I just had to shelve it because it was taking up too much of my time, and then I had to really focus on what, my life was going to look like at that point.
No, and I think that makes sense. So now as you're saying, okay, and I agree. I think with anything in basketball or anything in particular, do you realize the amount of work that it takes to get to the level that you can be at the top of your game, whether it's in business, whether it's in basketball or anything else? It's a lot of work, and people I think oftentimes underestimate. Probably is a good thing, because if you didn't underestimate, if you realized how much work would go into it, nobody would ever go do anything because it was way too much work. But now you're saying, okay, basketball, love it, want to do it, not going to work out, going into business. So now you make the transition in school, start to study that. And so as you're starting to, and one question on that, how did you decide to go into business, or what was kind of the
Yeah.
motivation or the prompting there?
So in terms of business, like I've always been someone that loves to get to know people and get to meet people and really understand what goes into finding a problem to solution. So like I always look for like problems before I find the solution. And so with that, because I'm always like a social person, I business was really a good avenue for me. My parents were both engineers, and that was just not my path at all. My brother is in is in law school. That's not my path at all, because you can't really be extremely social and you can't really, use the skill set that I was had. So yeah, I got into business. It really, the seed was planted back in high school. I had a professor that brought me into the business club and really learned a lot through that. And
Hmm.
then um, I always knew that was something that I wanted to be interested in and that I would be. So, college, met another professor named Bob Chalfant, who's now, I believe, at Case Western, or he's retired, one of the two. And he um, kind of fueled some of my passions to really start businesses.
So I'm going to
And
jump in really quick just because I found it interesting, because you mentioned two schools. So one is Weber State University, which is funny. We're right across the street from where our
okay,
offices are. I didn't go there. I went to end up going to BYU, but we're right across. And then interesting, I went to law school and MBA school at Case Western. So I had to just find it as a
wow,
small world that on both of those we at least have a connection with the different
yeah,
schools. So
yeah,
completely
yeah,
aside from your journey, but I just had to make the comment. I'm like, wow, these are
yeah.
both schools that I know. So
That's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy considering Cleveland, Ohio, and Utah are on completely separate
absolutely,
coordinates of this country. So that's a pretty crazy coincidence right there.
that's right. So anyway, so you decide, okay, I'm going to go into business. Have some or people that gave me some mentorship, some guidance, and decided
Yeah,
that's the direction I'm going to be in. So get a bit more serious about school. Or you probably, I'm guessing you still play basketball, but probably not quite as aggressively. But as you're getting into that, I think you mentioned that you started to also start your own businesses. I think starting with Yugo and doing some of that. Now,
Oh yeah.
was that during school? Was that after graduation, or
Yeah.
kind of what was that
So
timeline?
Yugo was the first company that I ever started. That was during college. That was during when I was taking principles of entrepreneurship with Bob Chalfant. And I remember him telling me a quote that the at this point in your life, the amount of assets you have always fit in your car. So you don't really have much. So you might as well try to go out and do something that you really, are passionate about. And so that business was right at the time Turo was still very young. And so the idea was allowing people when they're leaving to go on vacation at airports to drop their keys off in a locker. And with a code, someone that's coming in can rent their card out or car out,
Mm,
and you can get paid for it. So it was like a double-sided marketplace of people are going out, people are coming in. Uh, so I really thought that business could really work, and we got a ton of traction just in terms of being able to build and these other things. But the biggest issue was Liberty Mutual, or I guess I'll just say, auto insurance providers. They couldn't
mm.
cover it because Turo had already been taken as a commercial, like fleet vehicle type thing. So when you can't get insurance to cover it, that business is dead at that point. So I learned a lot from that. That was really the seed that was planted to, start down this path that I'm on now.
No, and I think that, it's interesting because and I like how you can have a good business idea, and it sounds like a kind of a good one, and would be a worthwhile business. But it's interesting. Sometimes the can't get insurance, other things are in the path that you don't anticipate doing and expect, and so you have to figure out either do I navigate around those, is it or surmountable, or do I go on to the next one? It sounds like in this one, it was basically just a, hey, I would have loved to have done it, but it's a no go. Can't get
Uh,
insurance
it,
coverage. If it doesn't
mhm.
work, then it's gonna kind of kill the business. So as that, first business didn't work out, kind of how did you figure out what you're going to do from there? Or what was kind of the next step in your journey?
Yeah, so I've always been of the mindset that there's always opportunity costs associated with everything. So if I were to continue with that, I knew I couldn't get insurance to cover it. So there really wasn't any incentive for me to start, continue going down that path just
Mm,
because you're going to end up with a massive blocker. You can't have autos that are insured in that regard, in that kind of a model. So shelve that. But what I did take is I knew I could build something to some point at that point in my life. And I knew that was what I really wanted to do. So I, took positives out of that situation, and was able to really move that towards the rest of my career.
no, makes sense. So now as you're saying, okay, take the positive, take the learning experience, figured
Yep.
out, hey, even if this one isn't, no fault of your own, but can't get insurance, not going to work as a business model, you'll learn some lessons. And so with that in mind, did you go on to your next business, or kind of how'd you figure out where you're going to go from there? What
Yeah.
was the next step?
Yeah, so the next thing I started was called Buggy, and I did this towards the end of college and then outside of school. So that was really planting the seed for avocado now, which we can get into later. But really, I was able to make a few connections in school, but plant the seed that I wanted to do something by myself. Wanted to build something. That's always what I've wanted to do. And so Buggy was a platform where people all over the world could create storefronts and you could ship a product, let's say from Uganda to Chicago. So
Mm,
if I'm a buyer in Chicago, I can buy something from a small shop in Uganda, and that business could be able to be paid in whatever they want to. So like they could run their business in Bitcoin, they could run their business in USD, I don't know, Latin America dollars, whatever you want to call it, right?
mm,
So that that was different, and I learned lessons through that, and because I learned how hard it was to build a foundation, like a sustainable platform. So that's why that one failed, is because I couldn't have the engineering talent to really
mm.
see that through. And so that, like anyone that's building their business, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people that have come on this podcast that have built businesses. If you don't have engineers and you're building a tech company, that's a big problem. That's to say an understatement. So yeah.
No, and I agree, and there has been, and it's interesting. Sometimes you can figure out how to come up to speed, get other people on there. But it is always a hurdle, and it's always one of those, but it's also kind of interesting that a lot of people, even that are technical people, they'll come on and say just the opposite. They'll say, hey, I had the background, I can build it, but I have no idea how to run a business or do sales or do. So I always, it's interesting how you run into those different things. And again, you either have to figure out, can we bring on the talent? Can we build it? Can we navigate it? Or is
Yeah.
this something that isn't a good fit for me? And while I think it's a good idea, I'm going to go on to the next one. So I think as you kind of mentioned, so this one you started out, went down the path, and then it kind of in a way led you to the current business, which you're doing now, which is avocado. So kind of how did that go, or kind of how did you transition from or going to the current business?
Yeah, so just like on a side point from what you said, a lot of people like underestimate one way or another how to build something. It really is the perfect storm in order to
Mm,
just not just to get something off the ground, but to actually like build something that can get to the point where you can even get it off the ground. Like you have to have the tech talent, you have to have the team, got to have people that know both sides because if it's just yourself or if it's just a bunch of people that are very similar to you, it's so hard because you can't possibly fill up all the holes, right? So that I think is something people really underestimate when they're building something.
no, I definitely agree that it is something that sometimes you'll underestimate or otherwise. Now, again, I'll go back to what I said before. I think it's probably a good thing that you underestimate because every business I've been in, I'm like, oh, this shouldn't be too bad. It won't be, we'll do this and X, Y, and Z, and we'll have the plan. And then it's like, this takes longer, more effort, more sleepless nights. And I'm like, if I knew all this when going in, would I've done it? No, so I think that there's
What?
that kind of that bittersweet as if you know too much, you never would do a startup, and yet
Okay.
but on the other hand, it's what makes it fun and exciting. So with that in mind, and kind of now returning to your journey,
Yeah.
so you have avocado. So you're coming out of Buggy, you're saying, okay, don't have the tech talent, don't have the background,
Yeah.
going on to the next opportunity. So how did you kind of figure out what you're going to do next, and what was that?
Yeah, so I learned a lot from both previous startups. I honestly think you can't go into the first thing you build and know anything. Like for me, I think the biggest reason why these other ones failed is because I didn't have the experiences of a failing in the beginning, but then also understanding and taking learnings from those. So
Mm,
avocado, I started it back in April of 2020. So it's been now on a calendar basis, it's been what about 28 months since we really started this. Um, so yeah, I've taken a ton of lessons. What we are is we are a platform that allows people to really learn before they invest. So we give them the incentive mechanisms to, you know, make their educational experience or their, interactive experience, however you want to put it, beneficial to them. So they can create, wealth and whatnot and
mm.
really engage with people. So yeah, I took a ton of lessons from those previous two interactions where the first thing I did was like I need to build out a team. And I need to get a team of people that really know how to build, but then also how to scale a business. And that's been a revolving door in terms of always adding people, different perspectives, filling holes. But that was my first point in this. And
Mm.
that's what we've been able to do at that point.
So now as you're filling those, and I think that that's with every business, and sometimes, especially with filling the holes when you get going, is you fill all the holes, and even if you're not skillful, and or you are, if you have founders, co-founders, but you're always going to have a lot of holes to fill, and you usually, for most people, I think, or all of them, you feel inadequate, or you probably don't have that skill set or that talent base in front, and yet you don't have the budget, you don't have the people on board, and you have to figure out how to fill those holes at least temporarily until the business grows out. So now as you're founding that business, as you're getting it up and going, how has it gone? Where's it at? Kind of how long you've been doing it, and kind of give us an update as to kind of where the business is at.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So we have been doing this, like I said, about 28 months. Really the first year to year and a half was figuring out exactly what we were doing. So there are a lot of pitfalls when you start, and you got to be able to really take the ups and the downs because you're going to find anyone that creates a business that there's a ton of ups and there's a ton of downs that you go through. And it's how you don't get too high or you don't get too low because if you swing in either direction, you're going to end up setting yourself up for failure down the road. So what we've done is over this last year, it's really accelerated. Really over these last 6 months, I would say it's really accelerated. Where I mean, we've built multiple platforms. We've gotten a ton of feedback. We had a bunch of users, and then we decided to rebuild the platform that could scale. The foundation could scale. And so right now we're in a funding sprint. We're going to be in a lookbook from the Silicon Valley Bank here later this month, which is going out to almost 100 venture capitalists, about which is going to be exciting. We got Plug and Play, which is massive incubator out in San Francisco on October 7th. And then we're talking to an investor right now through the due diligence process. So there's a lot of different things that you end up going through in order just to get to this point. And really what I would say is building like the foundation, getting the team and building the base is the most important thing.
No, it sounds like an exciting, both exciting opportunity and a lot of progress being made, and so that definitely, first of all, wish you the best of luck as you go out and pitch things. So now things go according to plan. You continue to build it. You're now looking kind of out into the next 6 to 12 months. So let's say you land the investors, things are going well. Kind of where do you see things going in the next 6 to 12 months for the business?
Yeah. So really, I think this time next year is what really I've based everything off of. I think we're going to be substantially larger. I think we're going to get to the point potentially where I don't know everyone on the team. And it's going to be a strange feeling just because when you get to that point, you don't know everyone. You know, the center of gravity kind of shifts and it moves, and you bring other people in and you bring other perspectives in. And so I think if you look a year out, that's kind of where we're at. Is we have a bunch of different people on this team that I don't know. We're growing, we're scaling really fast, adding in a bunch of different product features to the mix. So yeah, the dream has always been to go IPO, and I think we really have an opportunity to do so. We did a balance sheet yesterday, income statement. We're looking at 2028 is when that's gonna happen. So you got about 6 years, and you'll see that. So on the New York Stock Exchange.
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye out. It's fun. My experience, the audience feedback is the longer the balance sheet goes out, the less definitive it is. And my guess is in 2028, you'll be in a much different place than where you project out. And yet it's always part of the experience that you have to project out. You have to have a roadmap, and then you get to figure out how to pivot and how to navigate, because you're always going to be wrong, but you have some guidelines as to where you're going to go. So it sounds like an exciting path that you guys are on. So, well, with that, now as we kind of reach the present day of your journey, and even looking a bit into the future of where it's headed, it's a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
Yeah. So the worst business decision I ever made was, and it's honestly a lesson that I have used to this day, was relying if you rely on other people to build stuff for you, that is definitely not the way to go. So I built Buggy using offshore developers from a different country, and there is a big language barrier, and it just doesn't work well. So that's the biggest decision, or biggest mistake that I've made.
No, and I think that it's one of those mistakes where it's easy to make. You have to learn from them sometimes. Especially kind of an analogous is I've looked in to figure out the talent you need, who you need to bring on board, how that works, and having the talent, and how you go about doing all that, figuring out all of those things. And sometimes you figure out it's going to be way too expensive to find the talent base, or I don't know these people, or I have to come up to speed. And I think learning from those mistakes, kind of as now you moving on to avocado, gives you some background. So I think it's a great mistake to learn from.
It's definitely one you can build off of, for sure.
Absolutely. So now, second question, which is, now if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you give them?
That's a great question. I would say that always, no, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Never get too high, never get too low. The swings in a startup are insane. Like, one day you'll go from, wow, we just got 500 users and Jason Oppenheim on our platform, to wow, this platform sucks because of the way it's built. And you can't go too high or too low. I always say find the silver linings in everything and always try to learn and be better the next day than you came in the day before. I'll
Mm,
also say this is that the best thing that ever happened to me was getting that 2.8 in high school, because it shows that like that stuff doesn't mean much. What it does is it should like motivate you to find what you really like to do, and once you do that, you'll apply yourself, and you never know what the limits can be on that.
mm. No, I think that that is definitely a great piece of advice and a great takeaway. So, well, now as we wrap up the episode, as people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above. What's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great place. I use it all the time. Um, so that, and then I'm on Instagram too. Email as well. Anyway, just reach out. Any questions, any feedback, anything you want to ask me, I'm more than willing to shed my 2 cents on.
Awesome. Well, I definitely think that sounds like a great resource. Encourage people to reach out, connect, whether it's to make a new best friend or to invest in a great company. All are always a great opportunity. So, well, with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you, the listeners that are out there, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, and leave us a review so we can make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome journeys. Last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast, Kartik, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
I appreciate it, man.